The October rain hammered against Linda Morrison's windshield as she sat parked across from the Riverside Country Club. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart pounding like a war drum. Through the ornate windows, she could see the warm glow of celebration. Her son David's engagement party was in full swing. "You can do this, Linda," she whispered, checking her reflection. At 57, she still carried herself with dignity despite the storm clouds over her life. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, and she'd chosen her best navy dress, the one David had complimented last Christmas. Back when they still spoke 3 hours earlier, she'd been in attorney Margaret Chen's office, signing documents that would change everything. The leather portfolio beside her contained copies of her newly updated will papers David knew nothing about yet. "Mrs. Morrison," Margaret had said with concern, "are you certain about these changes? Once your son discovers what you've done, he made his choice." Margaret Linda had replied steadily. "Now I'm making mine 6 months. It had been 6 months since David cut her out of his life completely. The trouble started when he began dating Sarah Wellington, daughter of the city's most prominent real estate family. At first Linda was thrilled. Sarah seemed lovely, but gradually David became distant, critical of Linda's middle-class lifestyle. Embarrassed by her work as a guidance counselor? "Mom, you need to understand," David had said during their last real conversation. "Sarah's family moves in different circles. They have expectations." "What kind of expectations?" "They expect family members to fit in, to contribute something meaningful." The words had stung. Linda had raised David alone after his father left, when David was 7. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed her dreams for his success. Now, watching elegantly dressed guests through the windows, Linda took a deep breath. She hadn't received an invitation, but she was still his mother. She deserved to congratulate her son, even if he'd rather she didn't exist. The country club's doorman smiled warmly as she approached. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Wellington Morrison engagement celebration." Inside, crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors and oil paintings worth more than Linda's annual salary. Guests moved with practiced ease, their conversations peppered with references to vacation homes and million-dollar deals. Linda spotted David near the bar, magnificent in his tailored suit, smiling radiantly as Sarah whispered in his ear. Sarah looked like a fairy tale princess in flowing champagne silk, diamonds sparkling at her throat. They belonged in this world of privilege. For a moment, Linda almost left. Maybe David was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. But then she remembered all the nights she'd worked late, all the sacrifices, all the dreams deferred so David could have these opportunities. She had every right to be here. She was his mother, Linda. Mrs. Wellington approached, surprise carefully masked. Patricia Wellington was formidable, silver hair in a perfect bob, wearing what Linda suspected cost more than her monthly salary. "Mrs. Wellington, congratulations on Sarah's engagement. You must be so happy." Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes. Well, we're excited about the union, though. I wasn't expecting. We weren't sure if you'd be able to make it." The emphasis on able wasn't lost on Linda. "I wouldn't miss my son's engagement party for anything." As Patricia glided away, Linda felt the familiar sting of dismissal. But she pressed on toward David. Halfway across the room, he spotted her. The transformation was immediate and devastating. His face went from joy to shocked horror. Sarah followed his gaze, her smile faltering. "Mom?" David's voice carried across the space, disbelief and anger building. "What are you doing here?" Conversations died as guests sensed drama. Linda felt dozens of eyes turning toward her, but kept walking until she stood before her son. "I came too. Congratulate you and Sarah," Linda said simply. "I'm happy for you both." David's jaw tightened. "You weren't invited?" The words hit like a slap. Several guests gasped. The entire ballroom had gone silent, everyone watching with fascinated horror. "David," Linda said quietly, "I'm your mother." "I thought no." David's voice rose, cutting her off. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up uninvited and embarrass me in front of Sarah's family. I just wanted to wish you happiness. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Your being here is trouble," David snapped, voice growing louder. "Don't you understand? This isn't your world, Mom. These aren't your people. You don't belong here." Sarah placed a gentle hand on David's arm. "David, maybe we should know Sarah. She needs to understand. This is why I stopped talking to her. She can't respect boundaries. She can't accept that some things aren't about her." Linda felt tears pricking her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I raised you better than this, David. You raised me too. Be grateful for scraps." David shot back, loud enough for everyone to hear. You raised me to think working 2 jobs and living paycheck to paycheck was something to be proud of. Well, I want more than that. Sarah showed me what real success looks like, what a real family looks like. Each word landed like a physical blow. Linda could see Patricia Wellington watching with satisfaction, other guests whispering, Sarah looking increasingly uncomfortable. David, please, Linda whispered. Let's not do this here. We're not doing anything, David said coldly. Because you're leaving, right now. Linda straightened, calling on every ounce of dignity. I'm your mother, David. No matter how successful you become, that will never change. Is that so? David's voice dropped dangerously, but everyone could hear. Well, let me make something crystal clear. Linda Morrison. After tonight, after the way you've embarrassed me and Sarah in front of everyone who matters, you are no longer my mother. Do you hear me? You are nothing to me. The silence was deafening. Linda felt the world tilt. In her worst nightmares, she'd never imagined this level of cruelty from the boy she'd loved and sacrificed everything for. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, wrapped gift, a vintage watch that had belonged to David's grandfather. She'd planned to give it as an engagement present. A connection to family history Sarah's money couldn't buy. She set it gently on the nearest table. I hope you find what you're looking for, David. I truly do. Then she walked toward the exit, head held high despite tears streaming down her face. Behind her, conversation gradually resumed. The party returning to celebration now that the unpleasant interruption was removed at the entrance. She passed the doorman who'd greeted her so kindly. His expression was sympathetic. He'd heard the commotion. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said softly. That was uncalled for. Linda managed a small smile. Thank you. That means more than you know. Outside in the October night, Linda pulled out her phone and called Margaret Chen. Margaret, it's Linda Morrison. I need you to implement the changes immediately. Yes, tonight. And Margaret, I need you to come to the Riverside Country Club. There's something David needs to hear, and it can't wait until morning. As Linda ended the call, she looked back at the country club. Through the windows, she could see the party continuing, David and Sarah at the center, surrounded by wealth and privilege. What they didn't know was that Linda Morrison hadn't been just any guidance counselor. She'd invested wisely, saved meticulously, built a nest egg worth far more than anyone in that ballroom could imagine. And until tonight, David had been set to inherit every penny. But that was before he'd declared she was no longer his mother. Linda smiled for the first time all evening. Sometimes the most important lessons were the hardest to learn. Inside the country club, celebration resumed, but gossip about Linda's exit buzzed through the crowd. David stood near the bar accepting congratulations, but his smile felt forced and his hands shook as he reached for his whiskey. Well handled, son, boomed Richard Wellington, clapping David's shoulder. Richard commanded attention, 6 feet tall, with silver hair and the confidence of never worrying about money. Sometimes family doesn't understand boundaries. You did what needed to be done. Sarah squeezed David's arm. Are you okay? She whispered. David nodded quickly. I'm fine. She needed to hear the truth. But, as the evening progressed, David couldn't shake the image of his mother walking away, shoulders straight despite tears. He kept remembering moments Linda staying up all night for his science fair project, cheering at graduation, the pride in her eyes at his first job. David, darling, Patricia Wellington appeared, voice warm but eyes calculating. I wanted to apologize for that unpleasant interruption. I hope you know we completely understand your position. Family can be ... complicated. Thank you, Mrs. Wellington. Of course, though I hope this won't become a recurring issue. Sarah's reputation is very important, and we can't have disruptions at future family events. The implication was clear. It won't happen again. I'll make sure. I know you will. You're such a sensible young man, so different from will you understand. As Patricia left, David caught his reflection in the bar mirror. He looked successful, polished, every inch the perfect son. But something in his eyes troubled him, a hardness that hadn't been there before he'd started, desperately trying to fit into Sarah's world. You're brooding, Sarah said, appearing with a concerned smile about her. David hesitated. Sarah rarely referred to Linda directly about whether I did the right thing. David, you know I care about you, right? But you also know how important tonight was. Not just for us, but for your career. My father's been talking to Brookstone and Associates about bringing you in as senior architect. David nodded. He'd been working toward that position for years. I understand, and I'm grateful for everything your family has done. We're going to be family soon. My parents just want what's best for both of us. David pulled Sarah closer, trying to focus on their future. But across the room, he noticed Sarah's family friends huddled together, glancing in his direction. the mother showing up uninvited. He caught one woman saying, "How embarrassing for Sarah." "Well, you know how these social climbers can be." Another replied, "They don't understand proper etiquette." David's jaw tightened. These people were talking about Linda, the woman who'd raised him single-handedly like she was a social pariah, and he'd enabled it. More memories surfaced. Linda learning to cook his favorite meals from YouTube because they couldn't afford cooking classes. Working overtime every holiday so he could have expensive gifts. The night she'd cried quietly in the kitchen after his father missed another birthday. "Son, you look like you could use some air," Richard said, appearing beside him. "Let's step onto the terrace." Outside, Richard lit an expensive cigar. "Tough evening, but you handled it well." "Did I?" Richard studied David with sharp eyes. "You're having second thoughts? She raised me alone. She gave up everything for me. And now you're giving her the greatest gift a parent can receive, knowing their child succeeded beyond their wildest dreams." Richard drew from his cigar. "David, I built my business from nothing. You know what the hardest part was?" David shook his head. "Learning when to cut ties with people holding you back. Family, friends, business partners, sometimes the people who helped you get started aren't right for the next level. But she's my mother, and she'll always be your mother. But that doesn't mean she has to be part of your future." Richard's voice was firm but not unkind. "Look, I like you. Sarah loves you. But more importantly, you have potential. Real potential." David felt familiar ambition at Richard's words. "But that potential comes with responsibilities. To Sarah, to our family, to the reputation we've built. Tonight showed me you understand those responsibilities." Sarah appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by warm light. "There you are. They're serving dinner." As they returned inside, David spotted the small, wrapped gift Linda had left. No one had moved it sat like a silent reproach among the crystal. "And flowers. What's that?" Sarah asked, following his gaze. "Nothing important," David said, steering her away. But throughout dinner, David kept thinking about that gift. He knew what it was. Linda had shown him their grandfather's watch many times, telling stories about the man he'd never met, promising it would someday be his. It was the only valuable thing Linda owned besides her house, and she'd brought it as an engagement gift, only to be humiliated while Sarah talked to her bridesmaids. David slipped away and retrieved the package. Inside was the watch, along with a handwritten note. "My dearest David, this watch belonged to your grandfather. My father, he wore it every day of his working life and it never failed him. He would have been so proud of the man you've become. I know I haven't always understood your world, but my love for you has never wavered and never will. You will always be my greatest achievement, my proudest moment, and my most beloved son. Congratulations on your engagement to Sarah. I hope you'll be as happy as you deserve. All my love." Mom. David stared at the note, hands trembling. The watch was beautiful vintage Omega with leather worn smooth by years of wear. More than that, it was connection to family history, to people who'd worked hard to give him opportunities. "There you are," Sarah said, appearing beside him. "What's that?" David looked at her, then at the watch. For a moment, he considered telling the truth that his mother had brought a priceless family heirloom as an engagement gift, that the woman they'd dismissed had more class than anyone in this room. Instead, he closed the box and slipped it into his pocket, just something someone left behind. "Well, forget about it. It's time for our first dance." As David led Sarah onto the dance floor, he tried to focus on the moment, the beautiful woman in his arms, the elegant surroundings, the promising future. But all he could think about was the weight of his grandfather's watch and the look in Linda's eyes as she'd walked away forever. The dance ended to applause, and David smiled and waved. But inside, a voice asked troubling questions. What kind of man publicly humiliates the woman who raised him? What kind of son chooses social status over family? And most troubling was the person he was becoming, someone his grandfather would have been proud to give his watch to. As guests began departing, David wondered if he'd won everything he'd always wanted, only to discover he'd lost something infinitely more valuable. But it was too late. The words had been spoken, the bridge burned, and Linda Morrison was no longer his mother. Or so he thought. Margaret Chen had practiced law for 20 years. But she'd never received a call like Linda Morrison's at 9:47 p.m. on Friday night. As she pulled into the Riverside Country Club's driveway, her BMW stopped behind luxury vehicles, Bentley's, Mercedes, and Teslas belonging to departing guests. Margaret was petite with sharp intelligence behind wire-rimmed glasses and commanding presence. She'd built her practice on estate planning for wealthy families, understanding both money's power and family complexities. Tonight, she carried documents that would turn David Morrison's world upside down. The doorman looked surprised. Parties didn't typically require legal intervention. but directed her toward the ballroom where celebration was winding down. Margaret paused at the entrance, scanning until she spotted David near the bar in his perfect tuxedo, looking every inch the successful young man. Beside him stood stunning blonde Sarah Wellington, and nearby the unmistakable Richard and Patricia Wellington. She noticed subtle signs all wasn't well. David's smile seemed forced. Sarah kept shooting him concerned glances and whispered conversations. Suggested drama had already unfolded. Margaret approached with confident stride. "Excuse me?" she said, voice cutting through conversation. "I'm looking for David Morrison." All heads turned, immediate wariness in their expressions. Lawyers at social gatherings rarely brought good news. "I'm David Morrison," David said, stepping forward with puzzled frown. "Can I help you?" Margaret extended her hand. "Margaret Chen Morrison, Chen and Associates. I represent your mother, Linda Morrison." The effect was immediate. David's face went pale, Sarah gasped, and Patricia Wellington's expression shifted too. "Alarm! My mother." David's voice cracked. "What about my mother? Has something happened?" "She's fine," Margaret said calmly, "but there are urgent legal matters we need to discuss. Is there somewhere private we could speak?" Richard Wellington stepped forward, businessman's instincts kicking in. "Ms. Chen, I don't know what this is about, but this is hardly appropriate. Time or place. This is my daughter's engagement party." Margaret's smile was professional but firm. "Mr. Wellington, I understand this is inconvenient, but the matters I need to discuss with Mr. Morrison are extremely time-sensitive. They involve his inheritance and decisions his mother made today." The word inheritance electrified the group. Sarah's eyes widened, Patricia's mouth fell open, and David looked punched in the stomach. "Inheritance?" David repeated. "What inheritance? My mother doesn't have any money." Margaret opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. "Mr. Morrison, when did you last have a detailed conversation with your mother about her financial situation?" David looked around at the watching faces. Sarah's family, their friends, people whose opinions mattered to his career and social standing. The last thing he wanted was discussing his mother's modest savings in front of the Wellington family's wealthy associates. "I don't see how that's relevant," he said stiffly. "It's extremely relevant, because 3 hours ago, your mother signed new estate planning documents that significantly alter the distribution of her assets upon her death." Sarah grabbed David's arm. "What does that mean?" Margaret looked directly at David. "It means, Mr. Morrison, that as of this afternoon, you are no longer the primary beneficiary of your mother's estate." The silence was deafening. Even ambient party noise seemed to fade. "But that's impossible," David stammered. "She doesn't have anything worth... What estate?" Margaret consulted her documents. "As of today's valuations, your mother's estate is worth approximately $2.3 million. Patricia Wellington audibly gasped. Richard's cigar fell. Sarah's grip tightened painfully. "That's impossible," David said again, voice rising. "She's a guidance counselor. She lives in a tiny house. She drives a 10-year-old Honda. Your mother has been extremely conservative with her finances. She's been investing wisely for 30 years, owns her home outright, and has been beneficiary of several life insurance policies from relatives. She's also been living well below her means too. Maximize savings." David felt the world spinning. All these years he'd been embarrassed by Linda's modest lifestyle, her careful budgeting, her reluctance to spend on luxuries. He'd assumed it was because she didn't have money. "But why are you here?" Sarah asked, voice tight with worry. "What happened today?" Margaret's expression grew serious. This afternoon, Mrs. Morrison updated her will. Previously, David was set to inherit the bulk of her estate. However, due to recent developments in their relationship, she's made significant changes. "What kind of changes?" Richard demanded. Margaret looked at David. "Would you prefer to discuss this privately?" David glanced around at the faces, hanging on every word, all suddenly seeing him differently now that $2.3 million had been spoken. "No," he said hoarsely. "Tell me here." Margaret consulted her documents. "As of this afternoon, the primary beneficiary of your mother's estate is now the David Morrison Educational Foundation, a charitable foundation your mother established to provide college scholarships for students from single-parent households." David stared. "She... created a foundation." "She did. The foundation will receive $1.8 million upon her death. Her house and remaining assets will go to various charities she supports." And Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Margaret looked at David with something like sympathy. "David Morrison is mentioned in the will. He will receive a single dollar, along with a letter explaining his mother's decision." Silence stretched endlessly. David could hear his heartbeat, feel eyes boring into him, sensed the shift in how Sarah's family suddenly viewed him. "She can't do that," Patricia said sharply. "There must be legal requirements, family obligations, .. In Connecticut, Mrs. Wellington, parents have no legal obligation to leave anything to adult children. Mrs. Morrison's will is completely legal and binding." David found his voice. But why? Why would she do this? Margaret's expression softened. "Mr. Morrison," your mother asked. "Me too," explained her reasoning. "She said to tell you that she spent 30 years investing in your future, and now she's investing in the futures of other children who need the same opportunities she provided." "But I'm her son," David said desperately. "She's aware of that. She's also aware that earlier this evening, you publicly declared that she was no longer your mother." The words hit like a physical blow. Around him, sharp intakes of breath from guests finally understanding the full scope of what had transpired. Sarah's hand fell from his arm. "David, what is she talking about?" Margaret continued gently but implacably. "Your mother attended this party tonight. She came to congratulate you on your engagement and give you a family heirloom as a gift. According to her account, you publicly humiliated her and declared she was no longer your mother." Patricia's face went white. "Oh my God. That woman who came earlier, that was your mother." All eyes turned to David. "She wasn't invited," he said weakly. "She's your mother," Sarah said, voice full of shock. "The woman who was here earlier crying, that was your mother." Margaret reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Morrison asked me to give this to you. It's a letter explaining her decision in full." David took the envelope. With trembling hands, his name was written in Linda's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting from countless birthday cards and encouraging notes throughout his life. "Is there anything else?" Richard asked coldly. "Actually, yes. Mrs. Morrison wanted me to make one more thing clear. The changes to her will take effect immediately, but they're not irreversible. She's given David one opportunity to reconsider his position." David's head snapped up. "What kind of opportunity?" "If you publicly acknowledge her as your mother and apologize for your behavior tonight, in front of the same people who witnessed your rejection, she consider reversing her decision." "How publicly?" Sarah asked suspiciously. Margaret consulted her notes. "She suggests a public apology in the local newspaper, since several society reporters were present tonight and will likely write about the ... incident." Patricia looked appalled. "Absolutely not. We can't have this family dragged through the newspapers. It's not your decision, Mrs. Wellington, it's David's." David looked around at the faces Sarah's beautiful features, now marked with worry and calculation, her parents' growing disapproval, the curious and judgmental faces of other guests witnessing his personal disaster unfold. 2 hours ago, he'd been the perfect catch, handsome, successful, worthy of the Wellington name. Now he was revealed as the man who'd publicly disowned his mother, who'd thrown away a $2.3 million inheritance out of social climbing ambition. "I need to think," David said finally. "Of course. But I should mention that your mother's offer expires at midnight tonight. She wanted to give you time to reflect, but not so much time that you could calculate financial benefits versus social costs." David's hands tightened on the envelope. Even now, Linda was showing she knew him better than he knew himself. "Midnight." Sarah's voice was sharp. "That's less than 2 hours. Your mother is quite decisive when she needs to be. She said to tell you that she learned from the best, that you taught her how to make difficult choices about family loyalty." The words stung because David recognized their truth. He had taught Linda something tonight, just not the lesson he'd intended. Margaret closed her briefcase decisively. "I'll be in my office until midnight, Mr. Morrison, if you decide to accept." "For what it's worth, Mr. Morrison, your mother cried when she signed those papers. This isn't about money for Hertz, about love and disappointment and hope that you might remember who raised you." With that, Margaret Chen walked out, leaving behind a group whose evening had been completely transformed. At 11:47 p.m., David Morrison stood in the empty country club parking lot, phone pressed to his ear as Margaret Chen's voice came through clearly. "Mr. Morrison, I wasn't sure I'd hear from you tonight." "I want to take her offer," David said, voice hoarse from emotional exhaustion. "I want to apologize." There was a pause. "Are you certain? Once we place the newspaper announcement, there's no taking it back. And your mother was very specific about what the apology needed to include." David closed his eyes, thinking of Linda's letter in his jacket pocket. "What does she want me to say?" "The apology needs to acknowledge that you were wrong too publicly. Disown her, that you're grateful for the sacrifices she made raising you, and that you're proud to be her son. It needs to be sincere. Mr. Morrison, your mother will know if you're just going through the motions for money." Through the country, clubs, windows, David could see Sarah and her parents in intense conversation. They'd been strategizing for an hour about minimizing social damage. Not once had anyone asked how he felt about hurting his mother. I understand, David said. Can you arrange for the announcement to run tomorrow? I can, but I need to ask Carr. You doing this because you genuinely want to reconcile with your mother? Or because $2.3 million is a lot of money to lose? David was quiet, watching Sarah gesture animatedly to her parents. Honestly, 3 hours ago it would have been about the money. But I just read my mother's letter and I realized something. What's that? I realized I'd become someone I don't recognize. Someone who could look at the woman who raised me and call her nobody? Someone so desperate to fit into a world that never really wanted me, that I threw away the only person who loved me unconditionally. Margaret's voice softened. That's a difficult realization. The money doesn't matter, David continued. Even if she keeps it all for her foundation, she's right to do it. I need to apologize because I was wrong, not because of what I might gain. In that case, Mr. Morrison, I'll call the newspaper editor now. The apology will run in tomorrow's edition. I'll email you the draft for approval. Thank you, Margaret. And can you do one more favor? Call my mother and tell her I'm coming to see her. I know it's late, but I can't wait until tomorrow. After ending the call, David found Sarah standing behind him in the parking lot, arms wrapped against the cold. So she asked, "Did you call her?" "I did." Sarah's face brightened with relief. "Good. My parents think we can spin this as a family reconciliation story. Very heartwarming for the society pages." David stared at her. "Sarah, do you understand? What happened tonight?" "Of course. You had a fight with your mother, and now you're fixing it. It happens. I publicly humiliated the woman who raised me because I was embarrassed by her lifestyle. I chose social status over family loyalty. I became someone who calls his own mother nobody." Sarah's expression grew impatient. "David, you're being dramatic. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is you're correcting it for the money." "Well, yes, obviously for the money. We're talking about over $2 million. That changes everything for our future." David pulled his grandfather's watch from his pocket, holding it up in the moonlight. The vintage Omega gleamed despite its age. "Do you know what this is?" Sarah glanced dismissively. "Some old watch. It belonged to my grandfather. It's the only valuable thing my mother inherited, and she brought it tonight as an engagement gift. She was going to give it to me even after I'd cut her out of my life for 6 months." "That's nice, David, but it's not nice. Sarah, it's heartbreaking. She came here with love and hope and a family heirloom, and I destroyed her in front of strangers because I was embarrassed she didn't fit your family's image." Sarah's face grew colder. "David, I don't understand what you want from me. Do you want me to apologize for my family having standards? Do you want me to pretend social standing doesn't matter? I want you to understand that what I did tonight was unforgivable. But you're fixing it. I'm trying to. The question is whether it's too late." Sarah stepped closer, expression calculating. "David, listen. I love you. My family loves you. But you need to understand that actions have consequences. Tonight showed a side of you that concerned people." "What kind of side?" "The kind that makes people question your judgment, your character, your fitness to be part of certain social circles." David felt something cold settle in his chest. And if you handle this correctly, if you reconcile with your mother and secure your inheritance, then people will see it as you being smart and strategic. But if you don't take ... double quotes, she trailed off meaningfully. "If I don't, then what?" Sarah's beautiful face was hard in the moonlight. "Then my parents think we should postpone the wedding until you've sorted out your priorities." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm being practical. David, I care about you, but I have to think about my future too. I can't marry someone who's going to be a social liability." David looked at her for the first time. She was beautiful, sophisticated, connected to powerful people. She was also calculating, conditional in her affections, ultimately viewing relationships as social and financial transactions. "I see," he said quietly. "Do you? Because I hope you understand this can all work out beautifully if you make the right choices. We can have a wonderful life together, David, but it has to be on terms that work for both families." David slipped his grandfather's watch back into his pocket and looked at Sarah one last time. "You're right. It does have to work for both families." Sarah smiled, thinking she'd won. "Exactly. So we're good. We're done," David said simply. Her smile faltered. "What? The engagement is off? Sarah?" "David, you're being ridiculous. You're emotional because of everything that's happened." "I'm being clear for the first time in 2 years," David interrupted. "I've been so desperate to be worthy of you and your family that I lost sight of who I was. I became someone who could look at his own mother and see her as an embarrassment instead of recognizing her as the most selfless, loving person in his life. You're making a mistake, Sarah said, voice rising. Think about what you're throwing away. I'm thinking about what I already threw away. I threw away my relationship with my mother for a woman who sees love as a business transaction and a family that measures worth by bank account balances. Sarah's composure cracked completely. Fine. You want to choose your pathetic middle-class mother over me? Go ahead. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. I won't, David said quietly, because what I lost was myself, and I'm finally ready to find him again. Sarah stormed back, toward the country club. David watched her go without regret, then got in his car and began the drive to Linda's house. The streets were quiet, giving David time to think about everything that had led to this moment. 2 years ago, when he'd first started dating Sarah, he'd thought he was climbing toward a better life. Instead, he'd been climbing away from everything that made him who he was. Linda's house sat on a quiet street, nothing fancy, but well-maintained and full of warmth that came from being a real home rather than a showplace. As David pulled into the driveway, he could see lights on in the living room. His hands shook as he rang the doorbell. When Linda opened the door, her eyes were red from crying, but her face showed no surprise. "Hello, David," she said quietly. "Hi, Mom." The word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. "Margaret called. She told me about the newspaper announcement." David nodded. "I wanted to come and apologize in person first. Can I come in?" Linda stepped aside to let him enter the home where he'd grown up. Everything was exactly as he remembered, comfortable furniture carefully maintained over years, family photos. On the mantelpiece, faint scent of lavender candles Linda had always loved. "Can I get you some coffee?" Linda asked, falling back on ingrained hospitality. "Mom, please, just sit with me." They settled on the couch where David had done homework, watched cartoons, and recovered from childhood illnesses under Linda's care. Silence stretched until David found courage to speak. "I read your letter," he said. Linda nodded. And you were right about everything. I did forget where I came from. I did lose sight of what matters, and I did become someone I don't recognize." "David, please, let me finish. I need to say this." David pulled his grandfather's watch from his pocket. "You brought this to the party tonight as an engagement gift? Even after I'd ignored you for 6 months? Even after I'd made it clear I was ashamed of you? You still came with love and hope and the most precious thing you owned." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted you to be happy, I know. And instead of recognizing the incredible gift I was being offered, not the watch, but your unconditional love, humiliated you in front of strangers. I called you nobody. I said you were no longer my mother." The words hung in the air, ugly and irreversible. "I was wrong," David continued, voice breaking. "You are everything to me. You're the woman who worked 2 jobs so I could have opportunities you never had. You're the woman who sat up all night when I was sick, who cheered at every graduation, who sacrificed your dreams so I could achieve mine. You're not nobody, Mom. You're the most important person in my life, and I was too stupid and selfish to see it." Linda was crying openly now. "David, I never wanted you to choose between me and your future. I wasn't choosing between you and my future. I was choosing between you and people who only wanted me because they thought I could be useful to them. Sarah broke up with me tonight when she realized I might choose family over social status. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. She did me a favor. She showed me what conditional love looks like, and it made me realize what unconditional love is worth." David reached over and took Linda's hands. "Mom, I don't care about the inheritance. Keep it all for your foundation. Give it to kids who need the same chances you gave me. But please, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, let me earn the right to be your son again." Linda pulled her hands free and cupped David's face the way she had when he was small. "Oh, my sweet boy. You never stopped being my son. Not for a single second. Not even when you broke my heart tonight." They held each other and cried for the time they'd lost, for the pain they'd caused each other, for the lesson that had to be learned the hard way. But mostly they cried from relief that love, real love, was stronger than pride and hurt, and even the cruelest words spoken in anger. When they finally pulled apart, Linda smiled through her tears. "So what happens now?" David smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in months. "Now I call Margaret and tell her to change the will back. Your money should go to your son, and then he'll set up the scholarship foundation with it. Because it turns out, the best way to honor the woman who raised me is to help other kids the way she helped me, and your career, your social connections." David shrugged. "I'll build them the right way this time, based on my work, not on who I'm married to or which family I can impress. It might take longer, but it'll mean more." Linda reached for the watch David had set on the coffee table. "This was your grandfather's, I know. I want to wear it and remember every day that I come from people who understood what really matters." "Linda, fastened the watch around David's wrist with hands that were steady now, sure now, full of hope again. "He would be proud of you," she said, "for finding your way back." David looked at the watch, his grandfather's watch, worn by a man who'd worked hard and loved his family and never forgotten where he came from. It was exactly the reminder he needed of the kind of man he wanted to be. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too, sweetheart. Welcome home." Outside, the October night was giving way to dawn, and David Morrison finally understood what he'd inherited from his mother that was worth far more than money. The knowledge that family isn't about what you can get from each other, but about what you're willing to give. The newspaper announcement would run that afternoon, telling the whole city that David Morrison was proud to be Linda Morrison's son. But the real announcement had already been made, in a living room filled with love and forgiveness and the promise of second chances. Some lessons, David realized, were worth losing everything to learn.